Give future me a visual cue. This helped me last time to clip the video. Let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Casey McPherson with DOLA, and this is our third monthly meeting for the 2024 Land Use and Housing Laws Monthly Engagement Meeting Series. Appreciate you joining. We're recording this meeting and we'll post it on Engage DOLA as we have with the other meetings. As a reminder, since we've noticed that we have some recurring attendees and some new each time, we're going to make sure that we give the same foundation laying information. So we will be talking today about where we're at with implementing these 5 laws that passed in the 2024 legislative session: residential occupancy, minimum parking, accessory dwelling units, transit-oriented communities, and affordable housing planning. We also are doing this as item 2 on this slide of our engagement framework. So this is the time where we, as just advertised, present information on which tools have recently been drafted and are ready for input, which ones have been completed, and how input was incorporated, and any other relevant information about what's coming up and what's recently been done regarding the laws just mentioned on the previous slide. The other items on here are other efforts to make sure that we are having a continually open door, making sure that our local government membership organizations are aware of where we're at as well, that we have many offerings for subject jurisdictions or those that want to opt in or others to meet with us and talk about jurisdiction-specific questions. And of course, please do remember our Engage DOLA webpage. We are continually working to make that more and more of a one-stop shop to get information about what's been done and what's coming up, to receive input, and so on. On that note, here's a sampling of recently completed tools, well, to varying degrees of recent, completed tools available for you. We have created lots of guidance for the parking law, ADU, TOC. We did publish the maps for both parking and TOC by the statutory deadline of September 30th. Those are on Engage DOLA. We have a housing needs assessment, self-assessment tool as we continue to work to finalize the housing needs assessment methodology. Much more to come on that later today. And a preliminary affordability strategies menu, as well as guidance for the residential occupancy law. And as a reminder, these slides too are posted, or they will be posted on our Engage DOLA page. So if you would like to access these links, that's how you'll be able to find them. Here's a reminder on our general monthly meeting format. So we give general updates, check. Then we move into TOC, parking. We've split out neighborhood centers and strategic growth planning as a track, then housing planning, and finally ADUs. Last month, we covered updates in that order mentioned here, but I'll move quickly to this month. Here's what we're going to be going over. And I did want to mention here before I leave the general updates, I'll have I think one more slide, but before we leave the general updates, a note that we are hiring in the Division of Local Government for positions to support the implementation of this work. If that sounds interesting to you, please follow us on LinkedIn and other platforms where we are advertising those positions as they are posted. So we'll go through all of these topics today, some updates on where we are with guidance for TOCs, work on the parking law, timeline information for neighborhood centers and strategic growth. We've got some updates for you on housing planning and displacement work, and then ADU. It will be a little thinner today. I'll tell you what, it's very possible that this meeting concludes early today. My reflection of where we're at in the timeline is it's a sort of, well, for those who are working on a flurry of things, this will sound silly, but we're in a bit of a lull as far as input across the laws. So there's sort of narrower list at the moment of tools that we're working on. So that's why we'll probably be a little bit faster today than the prior two meetings. Speaking of, so a reminder for those who are new, participation guidelines. So these meetings are really meant to provide information, receive input, make sure that you're aware of what we're doing and how to give even further input beyond this, because it's just a webinar. So if you have other thoughts, we'd really like to connect with you through Engage DOLA, through email, whatever works. So please do use the Q&A to ask questions. We also do have the chat, but the Q&A helps us to track if we've answered things better. So we really like to promote that. I should even update the slide and will. And then finally, we use the information that we gather in these meetings to update our FAQs and otherwise direct the work that we're doing to roll out implementation. So thank you so much for being here. If you are watching a recording of this, thank you for being here later. And please let us know what your reflections are. Okay, hand it over to you, Nathan.
All right, good morning, everybody. Nathan Lindquist, Senior Land Use Planner at CDOT. I'm just going to do a couple slides with updates on transit-oriented communities. Next slide. So here's our overall timeline. As Casey said, we got the transit area mapping done, and that's up on the DOLA website. Kelly's going to talk in a little bit here more about the calculation model development. So we're kind of in the midst of working on getting a draft out to communities, and we've got several communities volunteered to be testers of the models. So that'll be a really good process to learn more about how these can be most helpful to the communities. We've got kind of chapter 1 of the TOD guidance manual published, as Casey kind of put the link to before, and then have been just meeting one-on-one with local governments as we get more into this. Next slide. Here's a link to the Engage DOLA website for the parts 1 and 2 of the transit-oriented communities guidance we published. And it's kind of a high-level overview of the law. There's kind of a 1-page summary, and then about 15 pages that just discuss everything about the law. And then what we're working on now is more detailed guidance. It's more like a step-by-step on things. But what we published so far is really meant for just to help people understand it at a higher level. So if you see anything in there and have questions on it, or something doesn't make sense, we can always update it and change it, and certainly intend to. It'll probably become a living document over time as we make corrections. So please let us know anything you see there. Next slide. The last thing we just wanted to put out to the group is that it's exciting to see some of the funding in the suite of laws that was passed that was tied to the transit-oriented communities bill. This was actually ended up getting passed last session in a different law, but was related back to the TOC law. And so CHAFA has some new information about the TOC tax credits for affordable housing. And so here's the implementation timeline for these. From 2025 to 2027, they have $2 million a year, so $6 million total of credits. And so they'll look toward those in transit areas. And that's because the transit centers and neighborhood centers piece will come later, as communities have some time to identify those things. So that in 28 and 29, the bulk of those tax credits will be awarded $24 million over those years. And so that will be available within those transit centers and neighborhood center areas. And they also have some data that 44% of tax credits over the last 5 years were in transit areas. So that's kind of interesting to be able to compare. So there's more information on their website, and exciting to see some of this stuff get going. I think that's my last slide. Yep, I'll turn it
Great.
over to Kelly.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nathan. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Blinn. I'm a senior policy advisor in land use and transportation at the Energy Office and working closely together with DOLA and CDOT to help support implementation. We've been helping some with the mapping and have a couple of updates that we've made. So just want to do some quick reminders first that the maps that were published by September 30th were created based on some very prescriptive criteria in statute. And we have more details and all the documentation that we've published on how those maps were created. And the statute also is pretty specific about how those maps get used, specifically for the transit areas. That goes into calculating the housing opportunity goal, and also informs where transit centers may be located once that housing opportunity goal is established. It is important to remember that the transit area maps don't account for exemptions in the law known as exempt parcels, which will be identified locally as a next step, but there is time to do that. It's not until June 30th of next year that there's that first preliminary report from jurisdictions where those exempt parcels will get identified and the housing opportunity goal calculation will get submitted to DOLA. Next slide, please. So just a couple of updates, and we mentioned this at the last meeting that while we did publish the final maps on September 30th, that if other data issues get raised that necessitate a change, we can make those changes. One of those things did come up. RTD Route 66 on Arapahoe Road was raised to us as not actually having the frequency criteria to be included both as an optional transit area, and this will carry over to the parking maps update as well. And so we had to make some updates in both places. So small change to the optional transit areas. While we were doing that, we also just added a new layer just for reference. There is a piece of the statute for when jurisdictions are thinking about where to locate transit centers. They can do so within transit centers and also up to a quarter mile outside. And we are starting to call these bonus buffers. We can call them whatever, but just as an initial term. And so we've added those to the maps, just if it's another helpful reference point as jurisdictions are starting to think about where these transit centers can be located. Those are available as well. And we added a version history section to the mapping documentation, just so we can track some of these changes that may happen. Hopefully there won't be a ton more, but again, if there are data issues that you discover, please reach out to us with any questions. And all those same links apply that we published last month and that are posted on the Engage DOLA page. So we'll just be making updates as needed there. Next slide. So as I mentioned, now that the maps are published, one of the next steps will be calculating the housing opportunity goal. Again, not due until the middle of next year. That said, we are working on draft guidance and tools, or a template spreadsheet that we're calling the housing opportunity goal calculation model that jurisdictions can use to identify their exempt parcels and calculate their housing opportunity goal. We are planning to publish that in November so that we can get feedback on the format and fields and how it works for jurisdictions with different capacities in GIS. And so we really would love folks to test it out, download it once we publish that, and give us feedback. One of the other things that we are considering and would love feedback in the chat or when we get to Q&A, we are considering providing a data set of parcels with some exemptions already tabulated, where the source is available or very clear what the source needs to be. So for example, something like walk sheds or the FEMA floodplains, we could potentially provide a data set that kind of gives everyone a start on identifying those parcel exemptions. And so we are interested to know if your jurisdiction would find that useful, and if you have any other guidance for us as we think about providing that resource. All right, we can go to the next slide. And then relatedly, another tool that we are working on and hoping also to put out in November is a model for calculating the net housing density and zoning capacity of transit centers, which we're calling the transit center calculation model. There is direction in the statute for us to publish a model and guidance by the end of February to support jurisdictions with interpreting the density and dimensional standards in the law. And so we're working on that draft now, again, so we can get feedback early and make sure that gets incorporated. And this will be designed both to assess what jurisdictions' current zoning capacity looks like towards meeting the housing opportunity goal, as well as to test potential new transit centers that they want to designate to meet the housing opportunity goal. So we've started some meetings with jurisdictions subject to the law. We have a next working group meeting on November 8th. And again, we'll be publishing a draft model and user guide for comment in November. So more to come on that. We'll have much more to say at the next monthly meeting, but wanted to give that preview. And next slide. Okay, I'll take us quickly through the minimum parking requirements law section as well. So here's just a reminder of our timeline. We had the same deadline for the applicable transit service area mapping portion of the law, September 30th. So those have been published. Last month, we published some sort of a version 1 of guidance for how the law works and how to comply. And then we're in the process of developing parking best management practices and technical assistance materials that will be due by the end of December. And then the compliance date for jurisdictions subject to the law is the middle of next year. All right, next slide. So again, as I mentioned, the update that we made to the TOD maps carries over to the parking maps. The parking law, HB 24-1304, has a similar directive for the state to publish certain maps by the end of September. It includes very specific detail for what should be included. And so we did make a couple of small updates. Again, removed in this case, Route 66 for RTD because it didn't have that half-hour frequency that is specified in the law. And we added a version history section to the documentation so we can make a note of that, as well as if there are other data needs that come to our attention that necessitate us updating the maps. So that will be a good log to look at if anything changes from here on out. Next slide. Great. So as I mentioned, we've been in the process of developing this resource for local jurisdictions for how to manage parking demand. Different strategies, best practices, case studies will be included. We've just wrapped up a number of focus groups in the past month that were focused on different topics, including how parking relates to equity and affordable housing, on-street parking management strategies, off-street parking management strategies. And we also spoke with some experts outside of Colorado that have some experience in this area, and just want to give a big thank you to everyone who participated, also to everyone who participated in the survey that we had out in August. So we've gotten a lot of input and feedback, and now we're working together with our consultant to develop a draft that we'll put out for review in the coming month. So lots to review coming up. And so, yeah, want to get that on everyone's radar because we'd love your input in making that resource as useful as possible. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this is just a reminder. We published some guidance last month on how this law works, the summary, guidance for implementation in local codes, and some examples of local codes and how they could be updated for compliance. So just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that as a resource, and to please submit any comments or questions to us on Engage DOLA. Next slide. One thing we wanted to mention, and we'll reiterate this for the ADU law as well, but we started to hear from some jurisdictions that they're planning to bring code updates to come into compliance with one or more of these laws in the coming months, whether that's with your planning board or with your city council. And we just wanted to offer that DOLA is willing to do a preliminary courtesy review in advance to kind of check general alignment with the law's requirements, if that is of interest, before you go to your elected or appointed bodies. So please reach out to us if you would find that helpful. We'd love at least 2 to 3 weeks to make sure we have the time to do that, but we'll do our best to accommodate. And so just wanted to make that offer. Next slide. I think I'm passing it back to Casey.
All right, thanks, Kelly. Okay, thanks for using the Q&A, everyone, as well. Thanks to Nathan for answering what you could so far. We'll continue to do that, and anything that needs a live discussion, we will hold till the end. Okay, onward with housing planning. So where we are with this law is somewhat similar to those of you who participated last month, what you'll remember. We did publish the self-assessment tool and preliminary strategies menu, and are currently laser focused on the housing needs assessment methodologies development and the displacement risk assessment guidance. Those have statutory deadlines of the end of this calendar year. There's more to come after that, but I'd like to give you an update on where we are. First, to lay some foundational information, particularly for those who may be new, but also a good refresher. The requirements in the Senate Bill 24-174 are listed here on the left. It deals with housing needs assessments, local, regional, and state housing action plans subsequent to the housing needs assessments, new requirements for comprehensive plans that will apply to municipalities, counties, and regional planning commissions, and then 2 state reports. There are a few other things in there, but generally those are the key components of 174. What does that mean for what we're doing? That's all here on the right. So we've already posted the first 2 items, the self-assessment and preliminary menu. We're currently focused on this item here in bold, which will be the bulk of the next slides, the local and regional H&A methodologies. I want to note a few other things. This bill did come with a grant funding program that we are anticipating launching in Q1, the first quarter of 2025. We will also be kicking off other work like the state H&A methodology, the Housing Action Plan, HAP, template and guidance. We are going to be creating some comprehensive plan guidance, but if you'll allow me, I just put TBD. There's quite a lot going on at the moment, and so we want to start work on that as quickly as possible, but I couldn't sort of nail down a timeline for you in time for this meeting. Similar with updating our energy impact grant funding policies, but that work will be to come sort of as directed by 174. And then, of course, the state reports kickoff will be early 2025 as well. So I want to sort of underscore that, because that will start feeling like a quick timeline once those projects kick off, and the state reports, I think, are going to need quite good, robust input. So please keep an eye out for when we kick that off in early 2025. Now, what I'm going to do next is do my best to channel some of the consultants that we've been working with on the H&A methodology development, who are on this call, so feeling on the edge of my seat here. Okay, here we go. So what I wanted to do with the housing needs assessment explanation today is to let all of you know what we've been doing in addition to our general engagement framework. So to develop the housing needs assessment methodologies, it's directed by 174, and also just makes sense to do an H&A methodology to get a whole bunch of robust engagement. So we have launched a focus group interview series in addition to our general engagement framework, laser focused on H&A methodology input. And so here is some information from what has been going on in those meetings. First off, we're starting with some foundational comments, like what is a housing needs assessment? And generally the idea here is that an H&A is the what. So we're looking at the data, we're looking at what's going on sort of regionally, locally, so that we can get that 30,000 foot of what the needs are. This is distinct from the housing action plan, the how. That is where the goals will be established, strategies, who, when, all of that kind of thing to implement what we need to implement based on what we've learned in the H&A. So that I put our consultant team's logos here in the lower right. So you know who I have sort of pillaged the slides from to show you what we have been showing in the focus groups. Creating the methodologies comes with its challenges. First and foremost, we have a diverse state, diverse regions. And so we've been working to dive into those details. What does that mean for an H&A methodology that can help us both work to standardize some components, but where can we have flexibility that can contemplate the differences across regions, across municipalities within a region, things like that. There's also some challenges we've been working through with data availability. So working very closely with the State Demography Office, of course, to identify challenges, work through them, and identify the challenges that we're looking at that remain. So there's been, I hope you're getting the sense, lots of partnership with data steeped people to look at what's going on and what can be done. Here's another common slide that we've been showing in the focus groups. This is the what of an H&A. So you could think of it as chapters, components, whatever word you like. But generally, if you're considering the analysis an H&A is doing, we're looking at demographics, economic trends, housing inventory, what's out there, and then the trends. Where's it going? What are the housing problems? What are the resources to deal with those? And then into the future, what are the projected needs, and looking ahead to policy and program recommendations. Within those sort of chapters or components, we've been asking a series of questions. So here's a sampling of what that has been looking like. We've been asking communities, how do you use your H&A? What makes it useful to you or not useful to you? Are there parts of the draft methodology that are unclear? You wouldn't know what to do with this, or incomplete. It's actually missing this lens or that data source. Questions about specific components based on those sort of chapters we just saw. And then will the proposed data sources meet your needs? Are any missing? Lots of good discussion based on those questions. And here's how the focus groups have been going. So I wanted to highlight so you could see the language in the legislation about the lenses that we were directed to include and have. But we've also sort of done more than that. So in the past 2 weeks alone, we've had 11 focus group meetings and we have more planned. There's another one this very afternoon. And beyond that, we have, beyond sort of the listed here and highlight interest areas, we've broken it out further. So for example, talking with local governments based on region, size, type, all this kind of thing, so that we can make sure to get representation from all of the many lenses. Okay, and here's a sample of some of the comments that we've heard so far. So much information, I'll admit, it's probably too small of text for a slide. I couldn't fit it all. There's been such good commenting. It was almost difficult to summarize. But here is my best attempt at that. lots of comments on data challenges based on community size, based on what's publicly available versus privately available, as well as what's missing entirely, maybe data on homelessness, accessible, visitable, habitable units, things like that. So there's been a lot to work through and getting feedback on data. Also, the importance of connecting with local service providers and employers. So part of this is forward-looking. What are the future needs? And that will involve connecting with those service providers, connecting with those employers to get a sense of what are the issues existing and to come. Lots of talk also about regional assessments. So we're talking about local and regional HNAs, and so regional comes up quite a lot. Some of the feedback that has been common has been, well, there are some limitations. If everyone does their own, if we're all doing local HNAs, there's a cost and time element associated with that, as well as consultant capacity. There's certain specificity that's needed for local decision making. By the way, if we're talking just regional, then how do we make sure we get enough specificity for local decision making, as well as, by the way, for anyone who might want to use information for Prop 123. Delineation of regions may vary based on topic. And then also one thing that's come up has been recognizing the differences across communities. So as I mentioned before, what to standardize and where to add flexibility. So we do have a region, but there's also variations of the specific communities within that region. And what do we do given that reality? Next up, AMIs and priorities and policies that are attached to that area median income AMI. So those percentages. So they're important, but thorny sort of has been the way that I would high level capture what the feedback has been. And then also lots of commentary on ways that the state could possibly help. SDO data, would there be an opportunity to purchase private data that has come up routinely, and then also the need to identify baseline methods versus deep dive for certain community issues or lenses. Next steps for the HNA methodology. We're continuing outreach until November 1st, so we've still got a little time here, and incorporating feedback into the final by November 15th. Again, we do need to do final review and post this by the end of the calendar year. So this has been just an incredibly fast timeline. So many thanks for everyone who's been able to give it time to review and give input. Comment submissions. So we're allowing for additional feedback after that 15th, if applicable. Just get a hold of us, kind of would be what I would say. If you want to take a look, provide some input, let us know. Because we will need to get this reviewed and finalized to post by the end of the calendar year. Okay. Now, the final piece of this is displacement risk assessment guidance. I mentioned last time our general plan, which is we have a white paper underway. That's a foundational step. And we are going to, or we must, per the statutory requirement, develop guidance on displacement risk assessment by the end of the calendar year. So the plan to get that done is we're going to have sort of tailored focus group engagement alongside the draft development. So for some of the tools, you may be coming used to us creating a draft, then a bigger input window, and then the final. This one's going to be a little different. So I wanted to make sure everyone's aware ahead of time. The hope is to get a nearly final first draft in early December, which is going to mean a lot of focus group and engagement alongside developing that first draft, to make sure that we are getting all the input that we need to in order to make it a solid first draft, so that we can do a super quick turnaround to post the final draft for the end of the year deadline. So please, heads up on that. Apologies that some of this is just such quick turnarounds, and that please note that this process for the displacement risk assessment guidance will be a little tweaked, but like same components, just sort of different mixing order. Okay, I'll stop there for the housing planning and turn it back over to Kelly for ADUs.
Great, thanks, Casey. Can go to the next slide, and we just have a couple slides on ADUs, not a lot of updates. Yeah, just a reminder on the timelines, and we'll include this, but similar to the parking lot, did publish a version 1 of guidance last month, and so we'll make sure everyone has a link to that. Coming up soon, we'll be starting work on an ADU toolkit that goes a little further than the guidance. I think it's a little bit more getting into best practices to really encourage ADUs and to support, different housing needs in your community. The compliance date is the middle of next year. And around that same time will be when the ADU grant program from DOLA will be launching. We don't have it on here as well, but that'll be a similar timeline as when the CHFA financing for ADUs, those programs will be launching around the same time. Next slide. So yeah, here's just a link to the version 1 guidance, as I mentioned, has some of the same components as what we mentioned for the parking law, including a summary kind of interpretation of what the law says and how to review your local codes for incorporating those pieces of the law, and some actual examples of local Colorado codes, how they would need to be updated for compliance. So again, please let us know if there's anything that's confusing, any questions you have or comments on how we could improve that resource. And next slide. And yeah, similar to what I mentioned for the parking law, if you are bringing code updates for ADUs and would like a courtesy preliminary review by the DOLA team to check at a high level, how those code updates align with the requirements of HB 241152, we're happy to do that. Please reach out to us by email, and we will do our best to turn it around on the timeline you need. So know that some folks are planning to bring code updates in the coming months, and just wanted to put that out there.
Just a question related to that was in the chat, and I answered it with our email addresses in the Q&A. Casey, do we have, I'm trying to remember, a standard email address for that, or say just email us all directly? I think emailing us all directly is probably fine, but just wanted to confirm that with you.
Yes. I'm working on a bug with creating a standardized email, so your best bet will be to email us directly. Don't want to delay a response to anyone who has a question.
Yep.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay, wrap up and next steps. So here are the topics for next month, which will be on November 22nd. We'll talk about the Transit-Oriented Communities Housing Opportunity Goal Calculation Model and Transit Center Calculation Model Introduction and Comment Period, Parking Management Best Practices Study Draft for comment, and then review the final H&A methodology and draft displacement. Lots going on. Some key links and reminders below, and then I wanted to give everyone a heads up that for the December's monthly meeting, we're planning to record and post a meeting. We were thinking people probably wouldn't join for a meeting like right after holidays, so that'll be the plan. We'll be able to give an update on the things that need to be posted by the end of the year, and then we'll reconvene live in January. So with that, here is a reminder of our contact information, and now I will stop recording for the Q&A session.
In Casey, we have